Jamie pressed the last box against her hip, pausing outside the bedroom to listen. The apartment was never truly quiet, pipes ticked, floorboards occasionally sighed, and air drifted in odd currents through the crooked windows. Even now, with midnight bruising the edges of the sky, the room was not silent. She let the cardboard scrape against the peeling jamb, sighing to herself. The air was cool, a little damp. Most of her things still sat in mismatched piles. Books leaned drunkenly on top of old sweaters. Cardboard boxes with the names of cities she'd left behind stacked 2 and 3 tall. By the window, an armchair wore a throw blanket like a shawl, facing an old wooden desk that had already picked up small drifts of paper and cup rings. Jamie could sense loneliness in the corners, something soft, familiar, but edged with uncertainty that's hard to shake after a move. The first time she really noticed the mirror, it was only because she almost walked into it. Tall and heavy, with a border of dark wood curling around its edge, it crouched against the bedroom wall, half wrapped in a dusty sheet that left strands of fabric pooled at its feet. She remembered the landlord mentioning something, a previous tenant, a thing left behind. It was too heavy to bother moving, and anyway, mirrors were useful. But she didn't remember unwrapping it. Maybe she had, tired and thoughtless, on her first night here. Jamie took a step back, studying her own reflection. She looked as she felt, hair flattened from a too-tight bun, eyes shadowed, t-shirt twisted slightly where she'd been tugging at the collar. Behind her, the room glimmered in reverse. The mirror turned left into right, making the familiar seem just a little off. She tried to smile. In the glass, her lips hesitated, then followed suit. She shrugged, turned, and unpacked books into shapeless stacks along the wall, working too late, barely glancing up whenever headlights from the street cut through the vine-strangled blinds. At some point, she grew tired enough to leave the last box unopened, just standing quietly. She rubbed at her eyes, and for a moment, caught a flicker of movement in the mirror. Only her own reflection, probably. She didn't look again. 2 days later, she was circling her desk, searching for a highlighter that had vanished. The overhead bulb buzzed quietly. The apartment glowed in pools and shadows. Each lamp she placed was cheap and second-hand, casting a color just a tint off from the others. She was too tired for detail but, turning her head, her gaze drifted unbidden to the mirror. The chair near the window was pulled out, angled toward the bathroom door, its throw blanket drooping half on, half off. She hadn't moved it. Glancing back at the real chair, she found it tucked in neatly beneath her desk, blanket still folded across the back. She laughed, nervously. Fatigue. Too many nights with not enough sleep. Migraines from trying to finish her first thesis draft. Maybe she'd dragged it over and forgotten. Jamie stood in front of the mirror, chewing the inside of her cheek. In the glass, the lamplight looked a little cooler, a little paler, and the paint on the far wall didn't chip in quite the same places. The difference was small, something you catch and let go of. Still, she stared at her own face, as if the answer would be written in her tired eyes. She reached back, slid the chair gently from under the desk, and angled it toward the window. The reflection lagged by a fraction of a second, and then complied. The armchair in the mirror now matched the armchair in the room. She let out a quiet breath she hadn't known she'd been holding, and told herself to get some air. The mirror only mirrored. That was its job. She forgot about it until the next evening. She sat on the edge of her bed with a half-drunk mug of tea, the dregs cooling fast. Her research notebook balanced on her knees, but her focus drifted. Through the thin wall she could hear a neighbor's television, laughter warping through drywall. Outside, branches tapped and whispered in the wind. She glanced at the mirror. The throw blanket was gone from the chair in the reflection, even though it rested heavily in real life, just as she'd left it that morning. A lamp she remembered flipping on before sunset glowed next to the bed, sharp and golden in the apartment. But in the mirror, the lamp was dark, its shade casting a soft, moonlit oval on the floor. Jamie reached for the lamp cord, switching the light off. In the reflection, the darkness didn't deepen, it was already there, as if the lamp's shadow belonged to the other side of the glass. Her stomach tightened. She pushed her notebook aside and stood up, close enough now to fog a patch of the mirror with her breath. She stared, glanced back at the room, then returned her gaze to the reflection. The differences were too plain now. The blanket missing. The lamp off. A book she hadn't opened yet lay on the bedside table in the mirror, too, its blue cover vivid even in the odd, shadowed reflection. In reality, the table was bare. Her knees prickled with nerves. She laughed, too softly, trying to shake it off. Maybe she'd seen something online that stuck in her mind, or she'd been dreaming awake again, lost in another sleepless stretch of hours. That night, lying on her back in the dark, she listened as the building shifted around her. Her thoughts wouldn't let her rest. She reimagined the day, trying to picture herself doing little things she didn't remember, folding the blanket, changing the light bulb, moving the chair without thinking. Every time she convinced herself, some small, sharp doubt slipped in through another crack. If she'd done those things, why didn't she remember? Jamie squeezed her eyes shut, letting the hum of the city melt at the edges, traffic, someone shouting, a far-off siren, until she slept, fitful and churning. In the thin light before dawn, she woke to the sound of paper rustling. Her heart hammered. She sat up, holding her breath, only to find the window not quite shut, the night breeze fluttering loose graph paper on her desk. But she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had just been looking in at her from behind the mirror. Morning made the world smaller, more normal. She showered and ate a tired breakfast of cereal dust and coffee. But as she dressed, eyes unwillingly flickering toward the glass, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection standing just a shade too still. It blinked when she blinked. It turned as she turned. But Jamie felt watched, as if the mirror's version of the world ticked along on its own quiet loop, sometimes matching hers, sometimes not. She tried to ignore it. In daylight, the discrepancies were almost invisible, maybe a shadow too deep in the corner, maybe that same stubborn book sitting in the wrong place. She told herself it was stress, or lack of sleep, or both. Maybe the mirror's age was to blame, warping the glass in uneven ways, or light from the west window making things look odd. That made sense. It sounded reasonable if she said it out loud. Still, Her heart raced whenever she passed in front of it. She tried not to look at night. The next evening, the lamp nearest the bed flickered. For the briefest moment, Jamie watched its light stutter in the mirror, blinking on and off out of sync with reality. The pulse of gold and shadow made her shiver, even after the bulb settled and burned steady. That night, she left the hall light on, just in case. She lay awake for a long time, one eye half open, aware of the tall, heavy mirror crouched at the far end of the room. She wondered, if she got up and looked in, what would she see? And what, if anything, might be waiting for her just on the other side? The night wore on and the apartment pressed itself inwards, thickening the air. Jamie worked at her desk, humming quietly, the lamp making a small yellow pool on the battered wood. Outside, the city faded into a hush that almost sounded artificial, as if someone had laid a blanket over the whole neighborhood. Only the occasional car muffled far off, or a single faint siren, broke through. She liked the stillness. Or, she had liked it, before the mirror started behaving differently. The tall mirror stood in its unusual place at the foot of her bed, angled just enough to catch both window and desk. Its ornate edges, all curling brass and beadwork, had always made Jamie uncomfortable, but she told herself it was just a dramatic antique, one of those things meant to add charm. Now it felt like a mistake, dragging it home off the curb. All the effort, getting it up 2 flights. She glanced up from her books again, chewing the end of a pen, and realized the mirror wasn't just reflecting the room anymore. Not quite. In the reflection, the bed looked a little off. The box at the foot of the frame, the one labeled linens, didn't seem to be there. Or maybe it had been shifted. Jamie frowned and turned, glancing at her actual bed. The box was right where it should be, squat and stacked below her pillow. She looked back at the mirror, then forward again, as if she could flick her gaze fast enough to catch the change happening in real time. But the difference lingered, 2 rooms, almost identical, but not quite matching anymore. She had been tired before, but now a keen, unsettling energy prickled in her arms. Jamie got up, crossing the squeaky boards to stand before the mirror. Her reflection moved with her, but the background details blurred, like a painting washed in water. She raised one hand, moving slowly. The other Jamie matched her, but darkness pooled behind them in odd places, the far corner by the armchair, and under the window. That shadow was wrong, she decided. It was too deep, as if the sun had set just a little earlier in the reflected world. Jamie decided to test it. She knelt and grabbed a paperback from a stack, a dog-eared mystery, and dropped it on the floor between desk and bed, right in clear view of the mirror. She stood and checked. In the mirror, the book showed up, but now it lay much closer to the desk chair than it should, almost tucked against a leg. She frowned, took 3 careful steps to move the book to the exact middle of the open floor, checked once more, but the reflection insisted it still brushed against the chair. She nudged it. Turned it. Each time, she watched as the mirror made its own subtle decision about what belonged where. The floor under her socked feet felt colder. Jamie wrapped her arms around herself, frustrated and uneasy. She scanned the rest of the room. On her side, The throw blanket hung half off the armchair. In the mirror, the blanket was neat, perfectly smooth, though the color seemed faded, a washed-out blue instead of the deep navy limb she'd always known. The desk lamp flickered once in her world, but in the glass, its glow was steady and unwavering. For a moment, Jamie wondered if the mirror had always reflected a parallel space, some old trick of glass failing with age or warping images. Antique mirrors picked up stories, her grandmother used to say, folding different years into the same silvered backing. Memories embedded over decades. The idea made her uneasy, but she stepped closer, fogging the surface a little with her breath. The reflected Jamie looked tired, yes, but calm. There was something about the eyes, a distant, flat expression that didn't match how she felt at all. Not for the first time, the little noises of the apartment pressed in, pipes rattled weakly through the walls, the fridge hummed in the other room. But as the hour crept toward 2 a.m., everything seemed to recede. The city, the building, all sinking away. Only the mirror remained steady, as if it was watching. Jamie turned off her desk lamp and climbed beneath her thin sheets, determined not to look at the glass again. She closed her eyes. The darkness felt absolute and pressing. She woke all at once, heart thundering. For a split second, she was sure she was being watched. Her phone blinked, 3:23 a.m. The mirror caught her eyes from across the room, glimmering in the low lamplight. She hadn't turned the lamp back on, but it glowed on in the mirrored room, casting shadows. In the reflection, she saw herself curled under the blanket, but something else littered the floor, a strange, unfamiliar set of shoes, pointed at the bed. Jamie stared, pulse fluttering. She pulled herself up, creeping to the edge of her mattress. No shoes stood on her own side. She turned, looked back at the mirror, and saw that the reflected Jamie had sat up, too, hands pressed stiffly to the sheets. Her doppelganger's expression was fixed and blank, eyes locked on hers. Jamie backed away, feeling her heel bump the armchair. She reached for her phone again, meaning to turn on the flashlight, but the screen flickered as she lifted it. For a second, her hand looked smaller, thinner in the mirror's version, nails bitten down to red, though hers were neatly trimmed. She shook her head as if to clear it, forcing herself to draw slow, steady breaths, to reset something in her mind. The room was her room, she told herself. The mirror was just old, just a warped piece of glass. An odd draft crept in through the window, turning the air icy. The world outside was so silent she wasn't sure it was still there anymore. Morning eventually crept in, but daylight was dull, filtered through greasy windows. Dust swirled sluggishly. Jamie studied herself in the bathroom, splashing water on her face, searching for any trace of last night's strangeness. She avoided the bedroom for most of the day, working at the kitchen table, tablet open to a half-finished thesis. But dusk came fast this time of year. Shadows crawled back. She felt compelled to go stand before the mirror again. The reflection was familiar at first, but then her eyes landed on one odd detail, on the edge of the desk, where there should have been a chipped blue mug. The reflected room cradled a little porcelain rabbit, something she'd never owned. Curious, and more than a little afraid, Jamie picked up her mug and moved it to the floor. Instantly, in the mirror, the rabbit toppled sideways, landing with an unseen thump. She bent to touch the air in front of the mirror's glass. Cold radiated out, suddenly searing her skin. She had the sense there were other hands, just on the other side, waiting to break through. The cold lingered, and night thickened beyond the windows. Pretty soon, even the lights of neighboring buildings seemed further away, as if the apartment was drifting elsewhere. The mirror's room continued to slip further from hers, bit by bit, details shifting, shadows moving, objects replaced with things she had never seen before. Jamie had the feeling that it was building towards something, the way a thunderstorm hangs over a city, pressure growing and growing. She was afraid to sleep, afraid to watch, but more afraid to look away. Jamie spent a long time that first morning just watching the mirror from her pillow, too unsure to stand up right away. Sunlight struggled through the thin window curtains. It washed everything in faded gray and made the piled boxes look like pieces of a jigsaw that would never fit together. The air felt cool on her skin and she wondered why she'd felt so stifled just hours before, one moment heavy-lidded with sleep, the next wide awake, eyes straying again and again to the tall, old mirror across the room. The filigree at the corner seemed sharper in the morning light, almost as if the metal curled a bit tighter, drawing the glass inwards. At first, she saw only herself, a woman with tangled hair, peering out from crumpled sheets. But as her vision cleared, she realized the details were wrong. The reflection showed the armchair angled away from the desk, when she was certain she'd left it squared up the night before. She tried moving the chair herself after dinner, scooting it until it sat neat against the battered wood. But now, the mirror said otherwise. She swallowed, throat dry. For several breaths she lay still, telling herself the change was nothing. That she just didn't remember pushing the chair back when she'd last gone to the window. But the feeling of something quietly misaligned stuck to her skin. She eased herself out of bed, crossed to the desk and, with one glancing look at the mirror, dragged the chair gently into its old place. Square with the desk, just as she liked it. When she risked another look at the mirror, it matched her actions now, the armchair properly in place, its shadow pooling beneath. She forced herself to get ready for class, the details of the reflection already smudging at the edge of her memory. The day worked its way past her in a haze of lectures and library stacks. But she noticed every small detail more than she ever had before, the way reflective glass in buildings sometimes seemed to shimmer with something almost, but not quite, familiar. In the evening, as she unlocked her door, the memory came back sharply, and she hesitated just inside the entryway before finally making her way to the bedroom. That night, Jamie sat on her bed, the mirror in full view, phone in hand. She caught her own reflection and considered taking a picture, but the very thought of pointing the lens that way gave her a strange crawling feeling, like ants moving across her scalp. Instead, she got up and checked the room, counting the pillows on her bed, glancing over the careful stacks of books, the mug she'd left beside the window. Everything in its place. She made a note in her small spiral notebook, mirror armchair, moved, and kept the notebook on her pillow, reassuringly real. The next morning, right as the slow light began to touch the walls, Jamie woke with the edge of a dream fading, something about running water, and glass bending inward. She blinked the fog away and looked around the room. This time, the picture frame above her desk didn't match. In the mirror, the photo leaned right, hanging at a crooked angle. On the wall, in the waking world, it sat level. She slipped from beneath the covers, heart beating a little too fast, and checked physically. Frame straight. She tapped it, and it stayed put. But in the reflection, the tilt remained. She watched for a moment, feeling as though if she stared hard enough the angle might fix itself, but it didn't. She closed her eyes and counted backward from 10, then checked again. Still the same. She wrote the date and time in her notebook, circled it in red. By evening, the details consumed her attention. She wanted proof, not just memory. At midnight, she placed her coffee mug on the left side of her desk, directly below the window. She noted the time she'd left it, the exact orientation of the handle. When she woke, it had shifted, the mug was now on the right side, closer to her notebook, just as it had been in the mirror's reflection the night before. The handle pointed towards the door, something she was sure she'd never do. When she crossed the room in her bare feet and picked it up, it was still warm, as if someone else had just used it. She put it back to the left, breathing in that still, strange quiet that seemed to grow heavier as the days went by. Jamie started checking the mirror obsessively. At first, she tried to trick it, moving things just before sleep, then waking to see if she could catch the glass in a lie. Sometimes, what she saw in the mirror in the morning would now find its way into the actual room by evening. Even the dust patterns on the desk, the fall of the throw on the armchair, would shift as if following some slow, silent tide. She told herself she was overtired, that her sense of reality was fraying after too many long nights and early classes. But she couldn't convince herself fully. There was an echo in her thoughts, always the same. What would happen if she let the mirror decide everything? One gray afternoon, she heard a faint scrape as she stepped inside. The noise seemed to echo from just behind her, but when she turned, there was nothing but the tall standing mirror mid-room, its surface bright and flat. She thought she might have imagined it, except the sound repeated, softer, as if someone moved the desk chair across old floorboards. It came from behind the glass, not from the air she breathed. Jamie's skin pebbled with nervous energy. She sat on the rumpled comforter, pulled her knees close, gaze fixed on herself in the mirror. For a moment, she saw not herself but the back of her head, her hair tumbling past the collar of her sweatshirt. She blinked until the image snapped back, her own wide eyes staring out. The boundaries between the two sides no longer felt solid. The oddness grew, stretching across hours and days. Where her world ended, the mirrors continued shifting, each side growing closer to the other. Once, as she scribbled quick notes, she heard the slow, careful voice of her downstairs neighbor drift up, "Jamie, are you there?" Yet there was no knock, no footsteps on the old stairs, only that muted call bouncing quietly off the glass. She tried to ignore it. But later, when she passed the mirror carrying laundry, she saw the neighbor's reflection standing inside her room, behind the window, peering out as if looking for someone lost. The apartment air thickened with each new oddity. Even breathing felt slower, as if time itself was settling into a heavy syrup. Jamie moved through the days with careful, deliberate steps, marking every little inconsistency in her notebook. But the more she wrote, the more things slipped through the cracks: the mug, the chair, whole stacks of books shuffled out of order. Small things, but they built on each other, a steady press against the world she knew. Outside, the city noise faded almost completely. Even the sirens seemed hesitant to break the silence that hung in her apartment. The only sounds that remained were those that echoed from the mirrored space, always slightly out of sync, as if reminding her that something else waited, just one pane of glass away. Jamie no longer trusted her own memory. The list in her notebook grew longer, the handwriting messier each day. She tried calling out into the apartment, half as a joke, half as a desperate bid for normalcy. Her voice sounded flat and muffled, swallowed up before it could reach the furthest corners. The mirror's reflection, though, carried on, sometimes showing her standing when she knew she was sitting, sometimes catching movement in the background that couldn't belong to her. Late one sleepless night, Jamie pressed a trembling palm to the glass. It felt colder than air, almost damp, and for an instant, she thought she saw the room behind it flicker, the shadows deepening, the walls slightly closer than they should be. Her own face swam in and out of focus. It was her, but also not her, a little too pale, mouth set wrong, eyes bright with panic. She jerked back, stumbling over her own shoes, and fell onto the bed. From somewhere inside the mirror, a faint echo of her own laughter whispered back at her. Slow, tired, strangely hollow. Jamie sat in the dark, heartbeat loud in her own ears, and wondered how long the apartment had been bending this way, and if, by now, there was any side of the glass that still belonged to her. At first, Jamie thought she could outsmart the mirror. After a sleepless night, she hunted through packed boxes until she found an old sheet, yellow where it had once been white, the edge stitched with a border her grandmother made. The fabric smelled vaguely of cedar and dust. Holding it in both hands, she faced the glass, looking at her own two wide eyes. The corners of the mirror snapped the light oddly, pulling at her reflection, making it ripple ever so slightly. With slow, purposeful movements, Jamie draped the sheet over the top of the frame. The cloth caught, half spilling over the ornate brass, settling into awkward folds as it brushed her shins. She smoothed it flat, then dragged over a chair and stacked a few heavy books at its base. Something in her chest eased. Not seeing the glass, not meeting her own reflection, or whatever it was, felt like a small victory. But that night, when she stumbled back from a fitful half-sleep for a glass of water, the sheet was gone. Not just shifted or pulled aside. Gone. Nowhere in the room. The mirror was uncovered, standing tall and unconcerned, the empty shimmer of its surface quietly inviting her gaze. Jamie stood paralyzed for a moment, her bare toes curling into the floorboards. Behind her, the dim glow of the hallway made the apartment feel larger, cavernous. She shivered, hugging herself, and forced her legs to move. She searched under the bed, behind the boxes, even in the hall closet. Nothing. Even the chair was still nudged close, as if nothing had ever disturbed the setup. Every night after, Jamie tried again. She used towels, blankets, old jackets, even taped paper across the upper half. Some mornings, the cover was bunched on the floor, drifting like a pale ghost. Other mornings, it was simply missing, only to turn up days later, folded neatly somewhere she never remembered placing it. Once, her old gray bathrobe was hanging from the closet doorknob, when she would have sworn she'd used it to drape the frame just hours before. The mirror never showed any sign of struggle or motion. Its surface stayed almost too clean, gleaming softly, waiting for her. Jamie started to dread nightfall, the way the shadows stretched and the apartment seemed to fold in on itself, the mirror always the one thing that resisted her attempts to control it. Worse than the covers slipping, though, was how the reflection itself changed. It hadn't stopped at wrong angles or mismatched shadows. She first noticed the difference one night when she crept from bed to grab her phone, careful not to look too closely into the glass. But something made her glance sideways at it, just a flicker, and she stilled. The Jamie in the mirror didn't move when she did. Her hands were empty, she hadn't yet crossed the rug. The figure on the other side of the glass was slower, lagging behind by a heartbeat, her eyelids drooping, mouth pulling down in a line of uncertainty. Jamie tested it, shifting her weight first one way, then the other. Every movement was echoed, but just a little off, a little delayed. It was like watching herself underwater, time stretching, each gesture dulled and heavy. Some nights, the figure in the mirror didn't move at all. Instead, it stood facing her while she lay still. Jamie tried to trick it, rolling to her other side without warning. But in the silvery light from the window, she could see the reflection standing behind her, watching, body perfectly motionless, except for eyes that seemed too dark, too deep, following even the smallest shift in her breathing. The urge to look grew stronger with every passing day. It was a pull not just in her mind, but in her body, as though a hook in her chest was being reeled toward the glass. She started to catch herself standing in front of the mirror without recalling how she'd gotten there, staring at the frame, the two Jamies meeting each other's eyes. These moments were thick with unease, her skin prickling, her heart beating faster. And sometimes, the other Jamie's lips moved in ways she didn't understand, silent and careful, speaking words she couldn't quite hear. As the nights dragged on, Jamie's sense of what belonged in her room and what didn't began to unravel. One morning, a teacup she'd left on her desk was gone. In its place, a little glass figure sat, a tiny horse with one leg broken. She had no memory of owning anything like it. The lamp by the armchair, its shade had always been green, hadn't it, was now a dull red. She'd blink, rub her eyes, and sometimes it would shift back, sometimes not. The changes crept in so quietly, she questioned her memory more and more. Sounds, too, grew stranger. The floor creaked beneath her feet, but she heard the same pattern echo faintly from the wrong direction, as if boots were pacing on the ceiling. Sometimes at night, as she lay in the dark, she would hear the rattle of papers, the scrape of wood moving, yet her own body was still and the drafts were gone. Some noises seemed to come not from the space around her, but from behind the glass. The acoustics in the apartment subtly warped whenever she was near the mirror, every sound deeper, flattening out in peculiar, unnatural ways. One dawn, after another restless night, Jamie awoke with a start. The sun was just beginning to filter through the window, painting everything in faint beige light. She tried to orient herself, blinking away a dream she could no longer remember. That's when she caught the movement out of the corner of her eye. The mirror, she hadn't covered it last night. She'd been too tired to fight, too worn out by the daily dance. Her own face stared back at her, but the room reflected behind the glass was not her own. Or maybe it was, but not quite. The wallpaper pattern was off, a series of blue flowers she'd never seen before. The desk was bare except for a single photograph in a tarnished frame. And the armchair was missing. Her mind scrabbled for an explanation, but none came. Gradually, the noises from the glass deepened. They were unmistakable now: footsteps, whispered voices, the steady murmur of someone living, breathing, moving just out of sight. She sat up, fighting the heaviness in her chest, unable to tell when the mirror had last reflected reality exactly as she saw it. Every time she blinked, the room visible across the glass seemed to flicker, rearrange, or deepen in ways that made her uneasy. A blanket that was on the floor a moment before now rested neatly folded on the end of her bed in the reflection, untouched in her own room. Jamie rose, padding across the creaking floorboards, compelled by a curiosity that bordered on dread. She reached out, her palm almost touching the cold surface. She kept her gaze fixed on her own eyes, tired, a little wild. Instantly, things began to shift. From somewhere in the mirror, she heard the light, deliberate click of a door shutting. A draft flicked her hair, although the windows were closed. The books stacked on the desk in the reflection toppled over, hitting the floor with a muffled thud, even though, in her room, nothing had moved. Yet a moment later, she looked down and realized her own copies were now scattered, matching the chaos she'd just watched through the glass. Her breathing felt shallow, like the air in the apartment was thinner. Above the armchair, the framed print, a sad, faded Parisian street, rippling slightly in the breeze. But in the mirror, it was crooked, hanging by only one wire, and she could see a faint, oily handprint on its lower edge. She turned, half expecting to see it there, and found her own wall clean. Somewhere in both rooms, a phone began to ring. The sound came from inside her own apartment, but it echoed, slightly distorted, from the mirror. 2 rings, then 3. Jamie watched the reflection instead of moving, frozen by how her reflection stood just a little straighter, shoulders tense, lips parting like it was about to speak. The ringing stopped. She pressed her fingertips gently to the glass. A chill ran through her. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw a second Jamie in the distance behind her reflection, a quick shadow, moving along the far side of the room before slipping out of sight. She nearly pulled away, but the compulsion was too strong. She just stood there, skin prickling, staring into the false room, her own face only inches away from the cold surface. The distinctions between room and reflection, between reality and echo, were almost entirely gone now. Every misplaced object, every change of light, every small shifting detail bled seamlessly from one side to the other. The apartment was no longer familiar. It was warped, stretched, filled with unsettling silences and uncanny echoes. She could not remember when she had last gone outside. The world beyond her windows felt insubstantial, faded compared to the vibrant wrongness behind the glass. She touched the mirror again, less fearful now than resigned. Her reflection smiled, a thin, knowing curve that Jamie was certain she hadn't made. It seemed obvious, all at once, that some boundaries were never meant to be crossed. Still, the pull remained. Staring back at herself, at the waiting figure, at the flickering room and its shifting noises, Jamie realized she might never escape this half-familiar place. She was watched, and she was watching, and the room behind the glass was hers, or soon would be. The sun rose, weak and gray, and the apartment's two silent selves watched each other through the pane, both uncertain which side they belonged on.